Hello, world. Welcome to the Way of the Psychonauts community screenings. My name is Mitch Schultz, and I'm joined by director and producer Susan Hess Logeais. Hi, Susan.
Hi, Mitch. How are you?
I'm well.
Good. Especially these days.
Yes.
Yeah. Anyway, I am excited today that we're going to be watching my pre-recorded interview with Jill Purce. I met Jill when I traveled to, I met Jill first in San Francisco when her husband, Rupert Sheldrake, was co-teaching a workshop with Bishop Mark Andrus at the Episcopalian Cathedral in San Francisco. And we had a chance to do overtone chanting with her. And I later learned when I went to film Rupert's interview at Hollyhock Retreat Center in Canada, that she also did work with family constellations. And so I'm very thrilled that I had a chance to interview her as well while I was up at Cortes Island. And today we'll be watching what we talked about. So with no further ado, I'll let Mitch describe a little bit about what she'll be discussing.
Great. Thanks, Susan. All right. So in this video, Jill Purce discusses how she met her husband, Rupert Sheldrake, at a conference in India and describes the years she offered workshops at Esalen. Her work focuses on the use of sound to influence form and transcend the limits of time. Using sound, she leads groups into past experiences, some rooted in ancestral memories that remain in our unconscious. She describes how accessing these dimensions dissolves boundaries that keep people locked in limiting behavior. She feels that we have evolved into silent cultures that don't participate in collective music, and her hope is that we recover these healing opportunities. So without further ado, here's the interview, and we'll be back soon. Thank you.
I can't remember exactly when I first met Stan. I've known him for so long. It was either in the end of the 70s or in 1982, he invited me to speak at the International Transpersonal Conference in Bombay in February, and which was Ancient Wisdom and Modern Science. And I was lecturing about ancient wisdom. I remember I gave a talk on creative tension, and Rupert was lecturing on modern science, and that's where Rupert and I first met, at this conference in Bombay. And so it's very memorable. And then Stan invited me to many subsequent international transpersonal conferences over the years. And there was one in Ireland, one in Santa Clara. I forget, there was one in Santa Rosa. And then recently, last year, and one in Prague, of course, and 26 years ago. And then last year again, there was another one in Prague where I saw him again. And then I lectured for him at Esalen during his month-longs when we were teaching at Esalen, Rupert and I. So I've known him a very long time. And then for many years, I was the general editor of a series of books with Thames and Hudson called Art and Imagination. And I asked him to do one on death. So he did one called Beyond Death. And so I worked with him on that. Yeah, so I've known Stan many, many years. Yeah. Well, my work for many, many years, I pioneered working with the voice as a transformational tool, sound in general, but the voice in particular, because sound dissolves the boundaries between the worlds. It dissolves the boundaries between spirit and matter and between each other. Sound creates form. So if you vibrate matter on if you get seamless, formless powders and liquids, and you put them on a vibrating plate and you induct sound into it, then you see all the sort of patterns of nature being revealed, being vibrated into being through resonance before your eyes. So sound creates form. Everything has its own sound, every form. And in just the same way, sound dissolves form. So if you find the sound of a thing, it's the key to its own dissolution. And so it dissolves the boundaries between people. You can create sonorous communities through sound, which is one of the main reasons that I use it. But also it allows us to go beyond the normal discursive modalities. We live in a world of duality, of past and future. What will happen tomorrow based on what happened yesterday, the regrets of yesterday, and what we do tomorrow in order to remain living. So we're constantly working in time. And one of the key features of sound is that it dissolves the boundaries in time, so that you're no longer time bound. So you're able to travel in time into different realms of being. You're able to travel in space, and go into different states of reality. So most of the problems that we have as human beings come down to us in very early parts of our life, or in my work, I think it goes back transgenerationally. So I think it's not even just in the womb, I think in the birth process, but it goes back through the generations of our ancestors. And so sound allows us to go through these different notional experiences of time and get into deep levels of unconscious. So most of the problems, most of the disturbances, most of the afflictions, the emotional afflictions that we have are deeply rooted in unconscious layers of being, which come down to us either way earlier than we can remember, so through in birth, or as I think in actually past generations of our family. And so they're deeply rooted in very unconscious layers which we have absolutely no access to. And so the only way of bringing about any change in our way of being in the world is having some access to these deep layers. And one of the ways used by all traditions is sound: chanting, rattling, drumming, trance-induction, every possible kind of, so all traditions use sound, so shamans use drumming and rattling and chanting, ayahuasca takers use icaros, or Christian tradition uses all kinds of chants, psalms, and intoning prayers, chanting psalms, singing hymns. These are different levels of melodicity. Buddhists use chanting, repetitious mantras of all kinds. Especially the voice, particularly, is one of the key modalities, or shakers and drums and instruments, and so sound has a way of dissolving the boundaries of time and dissolving the boundaries of space, and allowing us to get into deeper layers. And I consider it having access to the oracle, to some oracular aspect of our own being, some part of us which knows everything, or some aspect of something else that we are able to access that knows. So there is some way of knowing more than we think or know that we know. And so all spiritual paths require that we reach these levels of being in order to transform, because you can only transform in levels which are beyond the discursive mind, which just deals with the everyday of what do I want, how do I get it? I get it on how I got it yesterday, and very sort of primitive urges and desires in order to remain living. But any kind of deep understanding of ourselves has to reach layers which are much, much deeper than that. And so you have to dissolve the boundaries that we hold in place in order to hold us in a way that we can manage, in order to get to these other layers. And sound is the principal way of doing that. Because of its nature to create form, dissolve boundaries of all kinds. And it allows us to get into very deep layers of ourself, or layers of the other, or access to ways of being. We don't know what they are. We don't know what hypnosis is, we don't know what trance is, we don't know what meditation is. These are just names that we give to states of being, but we have absolutely no real understanding of what they are or how they come about. But in almost every tradition, sound is used, and is the most powerful way. And also for journeying. I mean, in Tibetan Buddhism, which I've studied for many, many years, there are actually specific sonorous practices for traveling in other ways, for being in different places at the same time, for encountering different beings or different teachers or different teachings or different initiations, or for moving through time and space in a way that we don't normally do. And sound is the key for that. And I think it's one of the most important ways that we have of going into other ways to access other aspects where deeper layers of troubles are laid down, either through the resonance through different generations. I mean, you know, within sort of people who work with mother and child relationship, you know, the relationship between a mother and a child who look at each other, you know, from one going down through the generations. I mean, that the resonance involved in that is well known, but it goes much further. It goes back through the generations. How can it not? And so, you know, if there's any kind of trauma in the previous generation, some kind of separatistic trauma, you know, where somebody dies young, or death in childbirth, or crazy mental illness, or physical illness, accident, you know, then these traumas create a kind of stable pattern in the field which goes down through the generations and claims or resonates with people in every generation. And so I use sound to really to work with that as well. What got me into sound in the first place was a realization that as a society, that the more apparently sophisticated we become as a society, the more silent we've become. So we no longer sing in some kind of religious, you know, traditionally all religious modalities were conducted through sound and chanting and intoning and mantras and all kinds of liturgies which involve chanting together. And as we become increasingly atheistic, thinking that we can condition what will happen to tomorrow or know what will happen to tomorrow based on yesterday, because remaining living is the key for humans, then all these ways of chanting and singing together have become irrelevant. If we don't, you know, traditionally we sang to live, to praise God, you know, in whose hands our life depended and was held. And so all the reasons that we had of chanting and singing together have been eroded from our society. And, you know, until I started this work in the late 70s, you know, if you wanted to join a choir, you had to sing in tune, you had to read music, you had to have an audition, and people just didn't do that because, and now everybody puts all their music into their phones and puts it in their ears in order to cram it back inside, because they somehow remember, it's a kind of atavistic memory of that sound should be inside us, and so they try and professionalize it, put it back inside, and then, you know, whereas it really, you know, should come from within, you know, out. So yes, all the ways that we had of singing together have been eroded, and we do very little now. However, since I've been doing this, and since the early 70s, quite a lot has changed, and so there are a lot of community choirs now, which is wonderful. So now, you know, there are choirs singing very simple songs. People have been researching songs from other traditions which are easier to sing than the Western art classical music tradition, which is, you know, difficult. And, you know, so people are learning traditional songs from other cultures which enable them to come back into it. You know, that in itself is slightly problematic these days, but nevertheless, this is something that has really helped people come back to find their voices. And so now you have these wonderful community choirs coming up everywhere, and this is glorious. So people are discovering sound again, they are discovering chanting again, which is wonderful. So there are three aspects to my work now. I'm still working, introducing people to their voice as a means of becoming present and accessing their whole spiritual side through sound practices. And in particular, one of the things I teach is overtone chanting. So what I was doing at Esalen was using the voice. So I did workshops like I still do, called Healing Voice, which is what I was doing at Esalen. So introducing people to very, very fundamental aspects of sound making, and in particular overtone chanting, which is one of the things that happened in the 17th century in music with the popularity of keyboard instruments, which have fixed tuning, was what was called the tuning problem, which is traditionally when you tune an instrument, you go from one note to the note 5 notes above it, the fifth, and then from that note to the fifth, that note to its fifth, and this is called a cycle of fifths. But when you get to where you should reach the octave above, you don't, you overlap it by a quarter of a semitone, and this is called the Pythagorean comma. And this is a big problem for tuning. And so when they were inventing all these keyboard instruments, it became a very big problem. So they were in tune in one place, but they couldn't get them in tune in other places. You couldn't change key. So there was this big discussion amongst musicians and mathematicians and polymaths, all kinds, and anybody concerned with it, makers of instruments, what to do about this. And they came up with the tempered scale, where if you take the octave, all the intervals in the octave, which should be in tune, are not. So they're, it's never a perfect fifth. It's always, all the intervals in the octave are slightly larger or smaller than they should be. So nothing is in tune. So all Western classical music is out of tune. All Western music is out of tune. We export our music all over the world. So any kind of music now is out of tune because it's all tuned to the tempered scale. So anything since Bach traditionally then became out of tune. So one of the only way you could, which means that we're not in sound in mind and body. So what I was doing was introducing people to a way of chanting on a single note where you change the shape of your resonant cavity in such a way that you produce through resonance what are called the overtones, which are notes which come about through resonance. You don't make them, but they become audible. They're always there in the sound, but you don't normally hear them. They tell you where the sound comes from, whether it's your mother, your sister, whether it's a fridge, whether what chainsaw, piano, violin, whatever. You can tell because you know the composite of the sound. So it tells you the source of the sound. That's how we use it all the time. But these sounds are always there. So what this is a way of making these sounds louder so that you can actually hear them as pure notes floating above the fundamental note. And these, because they come about through resonance, are always in tune. So it's a way of getting people to tune together and chant together in tune so that they can be internally coherent, so they can be, in other words, healthy. Because sound, if you're in tune, then sound is what makes you healthy because it inducts order and coherence into the system. And health, both mentally, spiritually, and physically, is about order. And so if you're tuning to music which is out of tune, you can never be in tune, never be healthy, really. And I see this as a symptom of the state of the world. But when you chant the overtones, because they're in tune, then you can be in a state of health. So I use this as a way into people using sound to retune ourselves, to be in tune with nature, to be internally coherent, to be coherent with each other. And so that's what I was always teaching at Esalen. But I have other aspects of my work. I work with these transgenerational traumas, doing family constellations, but using sound as well. And then I do very extended ceremonies based on the activation of the mandala, which I had this vision in 2003. So I've reactivated the mandala, which is the structure of consciousness, as a process that we as a group go through. And so my work has many different aspects. And but at Esalen I was doing healing voice work.
Welcome back to the Way of the Psychonauts community screenings. We hope everyone enjoyed Jill Purce's interview and that there has been some questions and some thought inspired from that. But before we dive in, let Susan do a proper introduction.
Yes, so Jill Purce is recognized internationally as the pioneer of both the sound and the ancestral healing movements. In the 1970s, she introduced the teaching of overtone chanting throughout the world and the spiritual potential of the voice for healing and meditation. In the early 70s, she lived and worked with German composer Karl-Heinz Stockhausen, exploring the spiritual dimension of music. She learned overtone chanting in the Himalayas with the chant master of the Gyotto Tibetan monastery. Jill practiced Dzogchen since 1978 with Namkhai Norbu Rinpoche, and in the last 40 years, she pioneered her workshops Healing Voice and Healing the Family and Ancestors, the latter a unique combination of family constellations, chant, and ceremony. Author of The Mystic Spiral, Journey of the Soul, her recordings include overtone chanting meditations and the healing voice. She lives in London with her husband, Rupert Sheldrake, and their two sons, musician Cosmo and author and biologist Merlin. Jill's upcoming workshops are online and can be found on her website, Healing Voice. Welcome, Jill. It's our pleasure to have you join us.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Hi, Jill. Thanks for joining us. Yeah.
The long arm of America comes into London.
We just wanted to reach out and say hello. So thank you for being part of this and the project in general and the live stream. So
you're most welcome.
Susan, do you want to jump in, or should I jump in with the first question before we kick this off?
I'll let you start, Mitch.
You want me to go today? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's go ahead and get this going then. I just wanted to say off the bat, I really resonated, and no pun intended with that there, about your statement that sound dissolves boundaries of time and physical form, as well as creating form. And I was wondering if you could just kind of elaborate on that and that relation to finding that equilibrium between mind, body, and spirit, and how that facilitates healing with sound.
Absolutely. And the problem that most of us have every day is that everything that we see or taste or touch is a kind of reminder of what we forgot to do yesterday. And that means that we have a kind of obligation to do it tomorrow, which means that we're isolated from the present moment. And so most of us spend most of the time in this separate from the present. And the only reality, the only place that really exists is the present moment. And so every spiritual practice is about how you overcome that separation outside of time. So time and language, discursive language, goes from here to there. Western music goes from here to there. You have dance signatures, you have time signatures. So it's on a journey. You know, it starts with Abraham taking his journey away to the promised land. So the whole of Western history is based on time. And the whole of spiritual practice is based on overcoming that time and being in the present moment. So that's absolutely essential for spiritual practice, is to dissolve these boundaries that separate us. So we live in a state of separation, and I see you as separate from me, and therefore I want you, and therefore I'm attached to you, or I don't want you, I'm lumbered with you, and I push you away. So I'm in this state of pulling you towards me, attachment, or pushing you away from me, aversion, all based on ignorance, which is ignoring what is, that there is really no separation, but we actually know there is no separation, and we act as if there is. So there's a kind of element of blame in that. And this separation is the cause of all our spiritual problems, all of our emotional problems, all of our health problems, all of our problems, full stop.
You know, I remember Stan Groff quotes someone, and I can't remember who, but they were saying that it's this profound need for connection, a profound need to feel part of a greater whole that drives our compulsion for materialism, shopping, addiction, sexual addictions, any of these behaviors that are inherently self-destructive to ourselves and the environment, so that instead of recognizing that it's this sort of going within to discover that there's a greater whole that we're part of, that if we could do that, we would be happier human beings. And
yes, well, I mean, all my work is about connection, real connection, because going back to the original question about the dissolution of boundaries, when we chant together, because sound creates form, as you pointed out, that I said, and also it dissolves these boundaries. And so when you chant together in a group, you dissolve the boundaries between you, and you have a real connection. And also you dissolve the boundaries between yourself and the divine. Between the physical world and the spiritual world. And so you can create a kind of coherence between the worlds, and a coherence with each other, and also a coherence within nature, because to be healthy, you have to be you have to cohere with nature itself. So this dissolution of the boundaries is absolutely essential for our well-being and to create community. And so I think of my work as creating a kind of sonorous community.
Mm-hmm. And I wonder, we have our live stream producer, Stephen, your son, Merlin Sheldrake, who's a biologist, and Cosmo Sheldrake, a musician and composer, both shared with us at a workshop I took a few years ago at Hollyhock, a video they created. They put a dish of water on a speaker, I believe, and I'm speaking, this is a sine wave, so we can't hear it, but it created a pattern in the water. They're filming through a very, a I don't know, a magnifying lens so that we're seeing something that you wouldn't see with the naked eye.
And
But
the reason you can't hear it is because it's 70 hertz, which is outside the human range.
Right.
So that's what we're actually hearing, would be hearing if we could, would be 70 hertz.
Right.
So I mean, I started my work seeing these patterns in nature. When you introduce sound into seamless, formless substances, you see all the patterns that you have around you in nature. And it was this that started me on my work in the very beginning. You know, in sort of in 1968, I saw the work of Hans Jenny, who was inspired by Rudolf Steiner. He was a doctor who really made this kind of this work famous. And interestingly enough, I was talking about this at one of my workshops in the 1980s, and there was a man there who was so fascinated by what I was saying that he went away and built the Cinescope, which is the machine that made the image that you're about to look at.
And I think it's interesting to note that we are mostly water. I mean, we're mostly space, and then we're mostly water. If you think about a coherent pattern is one that's lovely to look at and connected. A incoherent pattern is jagged and the lines don't connect. And so if we're coherent through the use of sound, then the water within us is coherent. And then we can, as the pun not intended that Mitch made earlier, we resonate with each other and the environment around us. So
yes, and you know, a lot of work, spiritual work, is about an induction of order. And I'll talk about the harmonics, which is particularly an induction of order. So that's very, very important, you know, in our transformational journey. Yeah.
Well, would you talk about that?
Sure.
Yeah.
Are you going to show? Do you want to show the?
I think. Well, we wouldn't see it, but Stephen.
Oh, it's okay.
Stephen might have shown it. I hope he did. We've been talking.
So a lot of the words, you know, a lot of the words about enlightenment are, you know, about order. Diamond body is the classic one, because a diamond is the same as a lead pencil, but it's the difference between the structure of the same constituent parts is simply order. So a diamond is supremely ordered, and so it's completely transparent and can cut everything else. And so diamond mind is the classic one. So all, you know, a lot of words used in mantras and spiritual, the Vajra, for example, is another induction of order. So a lot of these words imply this ordered state. And interestingly, if you stand next to somebody who's been 3 years in a cave doing meditation for 3 years, and you're a little bit of kind of in your normal jagged state, and if you stand next to them, you feel all your being comes into a kind of resonance with that person, and you can actually feel the order descending into your cells and molecules and psyche. And so there's no question that spiritual practice induces order. And when I started this work, and I think there's something about that in the video, I was looking for the very pure beginnings of sound. I knew that I didn't want to sing songs with words, because we're back in language and separation. And, you know, words might be appropriate in one country, you step over the border and you're singing the wrong song, you know, the wrong national anthem or something. So I wanted to go back to the very core of sound itself. And I was very aware, as I said in the video that you've watched, that Western music is out of tune. And so I wanted a form of chanting which was in tune. And so this form of chanting from Central Asia, where you chant on a single note and you amplify the harmonics. And the harmonics can only be in tune, because it's, you know, it's about the fundamental nature of resonance. And so this is the most ordered form of sound, because we can't be sound in mind and body unless we're really in tune. And all our music in the West is out of tune. And so if you're, I mean, it's glorious to listen to music, and I sing classical music, and we have, you know, I was brought up in a house with 3 grand pianos, and all my family play the piano, and, you know, but nevertheless, pianos are out of tune, and I sing opera, and you know, so all of this is glorious, but all music since Bach has been out of tune. Not so much out of tune you'd really notice it, but nevertheless, you cannot be sound in mind and body unless you're really in tune. And so this form of chanting with the overtones, where you're chanting on a single note, and the other notes that you're hearing come about through resonance. And so the intervals are precise. And so you can be in tune, internally coherent with each other, coherent with nature, with the geometry of nature. And actually you're hearing your own geometry made audible. Maybe I should demonstrate that.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, actually. Thank you for reading my mind.
Okay. I don't know how that sounded, but
No, I definitely heard the overtones. I think it's very grounding to hear that. And when you mentioned, I was struck when you mentioned standing next to someone who's just completed a deep period of meditation, and you're, drawn into coherence with that individual's groundedness. It made me think of when Rupert was talking about holding a purring cat. And that, like when my kitty sleeps next to my head and leans against me and purrs at night, I'm just drawn into this deep, peaceful state, really blissful state, because you're in that moment fully present.
Yes, absolutely. And I mean, there is a body of research which says that the purring of cats is a kind of healing sound. And I always wonder about pigeons cooing and cats purring and all these natural sounds, what effect they have on us all. But clearly the purring of the cat is a very healing sound. There's no question.
Yeah. And so I have a quick question, or I don't know how quick it will be, but so I've had I've studied a bit with someone named Swami Chaitanananda. And in his lectures, he often describes karma really as the disappointment of our ancestors, and that we carry the memory of the challenges that they faced and the adaptations that they had to make to survive. So that seems to, align with your work in family constellations. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, the work on family constellations really posits the fact that there's a kind of field of the ancestors, family and ancestors, which everybody has, which is, there's no question. And if anybody in a previous generation suffers any kind of trauma brought about by separation, interruption, early death, suicides, mental illness, emigration, dodgy dealing, injustices, abortions, adoptions, accidents, any kind of mental illness, or, all those kind of things interrupt what might be considered the normal flowering of a lifetime. And when that happens, then there's a kind of pattern of trauma which has a stability, and that comes down through the family transgenerationally. And then you have family secrets when anything is seen as being inappropriate in the context of the time, which historically was a lot. That too was kept secret, and so you have these this leakages of toxicity coming down through the family, and so it's about unfinished business. And so what the work that I'm doing is about working in the present to transform the past and therefore the future for our descendants, and we have to do that work. It's really, really important. For the sake of the world, really, because the world is chaotic, but it can only be made less so by each of us doing our own work. And this kind of work is very modern science now. Modern science.
Oh, Jill, yeah, I think you've muted yourself. We've lost.
No, I'm okay again. The hot subject in modern science is epigenetics, and this is I worked in the 1970s with one of the three men who got the Nobel Prize for discovering DNA. And if you mentioned the inheritance of acquired characters, then everybody paled and said, "Oh no, couldn't be. Everything's in DNA." But now the hot subject in all the life sciences is about what is transmitted non-genetically, and how does that happen. And so there's a lot of work being done about the traumas, the inheritance of people who were in the Holocaust, in the Irish famine, in the Dutch famine after the war, or the people in Finland who have moved to Sweden during the war. So a lot of these racial traumas create mental illness, chemical changes.
I think we lost your mic there for a moment. I don't know what's happening. It's switching between the internal and your external.
So is this mic working now? Is it
yes,
okay?
it is. It
Okay.
is. No, we're good now.
Okay.
So we don't know quite what happened, but if need be, we'll ask our producer to step in.
I can change it if you need me to change it. Just tell me. I can change it.
I think
I think
we're
we're
good
better
right
now.
now.
Okay.
And you know, one last thing before we pass it over to Matt, who will most likely have questions from some of our audience members, is, you know, in the introduction and in the course of your interview, you describe, you know, the sort of silencing of the collective. And so I look at shows like America's Got Talent or The Voice, and definitely they give opportunities to people who might otherwise never have a shot at a real career. But at the same time, it feels like they raise this bar of what we expect, you know, so that everybody has to be exceptional for us to want to hear them. And does that have a dampening effect on the regular population?
Well, it's very interesting because, again, one of the reasons I started this work was because I felt we'd gone silent as a tribe, as a people, because a lot of us felt that, you know, we couldn't sing in tune. To join a choir in those days when I started, you had to sing in tune, you had to have you know, an audition and so on. And so most people didn't bother, because through musical literacy, which began in about the 8th century, when people started writing music down, this was only available to those who could read music. So in a sense, the professionals hijacked sacred music. And then that leaving the amateurs. Amateur is an interesting word because it means to love something, which rather implies that professionals don't, which actually is often the case. And so music was hijacked by the professionals. And so many people felt that they couldn't sing and they had no right to sing and nobody wanted to hear them. And so they would take other people's recordings and put it in their devices and then put earphones in and then sort of go deaf in the process, and feel that you have to put, so there's an atavistic memory that sound needs to be inside us. And so what we do is we put it in earphones, somebody else's professional sound, because we aren't good enough, put it in our earphones and try and get it back inside as close as we can, you know, and then, as I say, we go deaf in the process. But the interesting thing is, since I started, you know, in the, gosh, it's so long ago now, the 70s, there are so many community choirs. I mean, this is a wonderful thing now, that everywhere you look, there are community choirs starting with people who can't sing, people who, you know, or feel they can't sing, but they do sing together. And this is just the most wonderful thing. Of course, ironically, it's the one thing we can't do right now. But anyway, more of that later.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure. Should we pass it over to Matt?
Yeah, sure. Can you hear me okay? Is all good?
We're good.
Yep.
We're good.
Yeah, we got you. Matt, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, this has been very interesting. We have a audience question from a guy named Portfee. Jill, what is the most important knowledge that you've learned from these practices? Thank you.
It's the different ways of being present, and not, you know, a bit like I just was saying about not regretting the past and anticipating the future, because we tend to anticipate the future because it's full of what might happen. You know, we might die, or, you know, so we're trying to you know, make sure, based on what happened yesterday, that what happened tomorrow is going to be okay and we'll still be alive. And so I think the thing about chanting is you can only chant in the present, but it's more important to listen to yourself chanting than to actually to listen to the sound you're making than make the sound you're listening to. In other words, creating a circuit of attention. And that way, because you can only chant in the present, and if you listen to yourself chanting in the present, then you can't be worried about what happened yesterday and is going to or might happen tomorrow. And so I think the single most powerful thing I've learned is all the different ways of being present. And sound corrals the mind. You know, a mantra is very interesting because it's a kind of repetitive. It doesn't have discursive sentences. It has words which have a meaning, usually some kind of quality of enlightenment, and you repeat it again and again and again, so that instead of going from here to there, like Western music does in this dance-like activity that with this time signature and so forth, which is linear, it's rotational. So it's repetitive. It's corralling the mind into the present, like the spiral. I wrote a book called The Mystic Spiral, which is very much the same thing. It's rotating ourselves so that we are in the center of the spiral. We are in the center of the mantra. And so what the most important things that I've ever learned are all the different means of doing that, and in particular sound. And then in terms of healing, on another level, then working with these to dissolve the traumas, the inherited traumas of the ancestors.
Wonderful. We do have another question from Charlie. Does overtone singing affect morphic resonance or the morphic field in any special way?
Well, I think it does. Yes, I think it amplifies the morphic field of our own state of health.
I would imagine, yeah.
So I think definitely, yes. We don't really know what fields are. We only know, we don't even know what gravitational fields are. We don't know what any fields are. We only know what they are by the effects that they have. And it's the same with morphic fields. But yeah, it brings about order in the field without a doubt. Yeah. Coherence.
I'm just going to jump in really quickly, because I also think, we're talking about the importance of chanting and community choirs. And in fact, it's that by coming together and resonating together, aren't we building connection on a level that allows us to survive differences of opinion and cultivate tolerance?
Yes. I love to work with groups, and until now, when we can't, I've worked all my life with groups, large and small, and the sound enables the group to come together in a way that nothing else does. The spiritual practice, and it's the most wonderful thing. This community that gets created in this way.
And those were kind of the rituals that held our more ancient civilizations together. Am I wrong?
Absolutely. And one of the things that I do is I do these week-long ceremonies. I've activated them in a ritual practice where we actually become the mandala, which is a very complex diagram of the state of consciousness. And so I've done this whole week-long, I do this regularly twice a year, these week-long ceremonies where we become the mandala, the state of our own consciousness, going through the directions and transforming the afflictive emotions into their corresponding wisdoms. So ceremony and rituals are really essential.
I think as a society today, these are things that really need to be brought back into how we function together as a collective.
Definitely, yeah, and which is why I'm so keen and do this twice a year, and have done for many, many years. These very extended. There are no extended ceremonies or rituals left in our life, and so this is one. They last for a week, and it's just extraordinary the effect that it has on people and on the relationships between them.
And so, Matt, are there other questions from the audience, or Mitch, do you have a question?
I do have one, but let's see if Matt has some other questions from the audience, and then I'll.
Yes, we actually have just one more, and it circles around Jason saying here, without sound and music, what else would the world be but a barren planet? How boring it would be to live in. So I just want to say, what is your view, Jill, on what music is? Our ability to create music with our voice. It seems to be pretty sacred, but also very kind of unique to the human experience.
Well, I agree totally. I think it would be a very barren place without music, and it's a way of making our thoughts and voices conscious. So it's an induction of order and consciousness, and again, as I mentioned earlier, it dissolves the boundaries between us. And also it inducts this extraordinary order and to chant to chant means to be made magical. To enchant is to be made magical, and if you're not enchanted, then you need to chant.
You mind if I start chanting now, because I need to be enchanted, I think. That was great. I love that. Yeah. Matt, are there any other questions there, or could I throw one out?
Go for it. I think we're
Okay.
wrapped on audience questions for now.
So I've altered my second question for you, Jill, after we spoke the other day,
no.
but it's not too far off. So
Okay.
instead of what would you say to 7.8 billion people on the planet, what would you sing to 7.8 billion people on the planet?
Well, I wouldn't sing to them. I would invite them to sing themselves. And that's very important, because we have such a passive culture where, we absorb other people's creativity. And it's a reclamation. My work with the voice is a reclamation program where we're all empowered to use our voices. So what I would do is I would invite everybody to chant with me, and I might give them some quick lessons on the overtone chanting so that we can all do that together, because then it's a little bit like the music of the spheres. It sounds very ethereal and very magical. And so I think that's what I would encourage people to do, to use their own voices.
I was just sitting here trying to imagine what it would sound like with everybody on the planet doing that at once.
Wouldn't that be just
oh my goodness,
wonderful?
Amazing. Yeah,
I know. The world would really turn and change. My goodness.
It would start purring back at us, wouldn't it?
It would.
Instead of scratching us. Yeah.
Yeah. We'd be living in a very, very different place.
Mm-hmm.
But it is very interesting. That I don't know how it is in the States, but one of the things that in England we can't, you can get married with 30 people, but you can't sing. You can go to church, but you can't sing. So singing has, because there's this idea that somehow it's a way of transmitting the dreaded virus. So what it reminds me of is Hildegard von Bingen, who's a great heroine of mine. She was a 12th century abbess, healer, artist, musician, composer, diplomat, and the most, she had a whole nunnery of women, and most amazing. And she buried somebody in sacred ground who shouldn't have been buried in sacred ground, and so the priest decided she had to be punished. And so he thought very carefully about how to punish her, and he punished her in the most extreme way he could, which was, he said that she and her women could say the mass, but they couldn't sing it. So this was her punishment. And I almost feel like the world is punishing us right now for the absolute dreadful state of the world, the overheating and the death of all the animals and the extinction problem. And, it's almost like we're being woken up by being punished so that we can't sing, to realize that we have to transform our society and the world if we're going to survive. And so but actually, on a more practical level, I do have CDs that people can buy to sing with. They can get them on my website, healingvoice.com, and I hope people will come and do the family work with me. I've started doing the family work online, and it is miraculous. It really works extraordinarily well. And I'm going to be doing that in September on the 11th, 12th, and 13th, and it's absolutely magical. It's extraordinary. I'm astonished how well it works.
And I think I think Stephen is showing lower thirds as we're speaking, so that people can find it. And Matt will be posting that on our Facebook that accompanies this live stream, so that people will be able to find your website. And there's also an Eventbrite link for people who would like to sign up for the workshop in September.
And if anybody wants to get the CDs to chant while they can't chant in groups, you can get those from my website as well. You can find them there. Yeah.
Well, as you were speaking about chanting collectively, we participated in one of these Black Lives Matter marches here in Portland, and before the feds showed up. And it was, there were thousands of people chanting in unison. And there was something so powerful about that.
Yeah.
And it was because the crowd was so big and people had bullhorns that only reached so many people at a time. It would go in waves. You could hear the flow in waves. And I think that may be how we're replacing, the musical form of chanting is.
Yes, I mean, that's why people chant at football matches.
I didn't know that.
Oh, yeah.
Because does it give, and is that also why it's so hard for these sports events right now without an audience cheering and chanting?
Absolutely, yes. It's a very, very powerful means of spurring on your team.
I didn't realize that. Well, I mean, I know it's nice to hear the audience, but I didn't realize that it had that.
Yeah.
Oh, how cool. Mitch, do you have anything else you want to ask?
No, I just keep, again, going back to the entire world singing. I keep getting that visual in my head, and I'm going, wow, that would just sound so amazing. And I could just see Jill like taking them through the different levels. Yeah.
And it'd be a wave.
I'm caught up in that. It would be a wave, right? We could start and just go all the way around the globe.
It would be a kind of Mexican wave of chant all around the world.
I think it's wonderful.
Wouldn't it be
Maybe
glorious?
We could start that. We could start doing a live stream and then encouraging and then getting everybody out.
Absolutely.
24 hours.
Yeah.
So I just got a note from our live stream director and producer, Stephen Tucker, who I think would like to jump in and ask a question. I don't know. He's not a disembodied voice. Okay, there he is.
Hi, Stephen. Hi. Well, it's very difficult to, as you probably know, I mean, you're bound to know, if you have a group, when I do workshops online, if everybody chants in their various places with their various connections, it sounds very choppy because everybody's got a different connection. So when you see these extraordinary musical events online with thousands of faces in little boxes, somebody, I guess like you, has been syncing the sounds from recordings and syncing the visuals and making it work that way, which is, not very real. So until we have some system which allows us really to be in tune and at least in time, I don't see how we can really sync that online. I mean,